Good morning. Well, it's actually the afternoon, but I'm in the Pacific Coast and still feels like morning to me. My name is Lazarus Chernik, and I am the guest host of the Professional Artist Today. Um, you are listening to us on 107.7, United Public Radio Network out of New Orleans, simulcast on YouTube and Facebook, Twitch, and wherever fine radios are sold. Today we're going to be briefly. Echo is traveling today. She's on a plane right now, so she's flying to Los Angeles. Both of us are judges for the Illustrators of the Future competition, which gives away awards in Hollywood every single year. The award ceremony will be this Thursday. There'll be some online content posted about it to promote the young artists and illustrators. It's a sister competition to the Writers of the Future, and everyone there from all walks of life, all over the world, international competition, both of them. And please learn more about it and support the winners because they really, really, really worked hard for this. So today I'm going to be talking about being flexible as an artist. I'm not going to be so gauche as to say that it's more important now than ever. It's always been important, but there are different ways of being flexible. Every artist is different. They have a different reason why they got into it, a different passion that led them through it. And I'm going to be talking about more than just illustration, but primarily this is for illustrators, but not exclusively. I am not an illustrator. I have illustrated. What is illustration? And this is going to be a general description for everyone who doesn't necessarily know anything about art at all. Illustration is a companion field to what people think of as fine art. Fine art is sort of a general classification of art that is made out of expression for people to buy just the artwork and to enjoy and be inspired by. In general, the difference between fine art and illustration is that while both are telling stories, that illustrators tell a story to communicate an idea very specifically. It might be their own story, might be their own idea, it might be someone else's. It might be as simple as just a line drawing of a hand holding a screwdriver and showing which way it's supposed to be turned or in order to put the screw in. It could be as evocative as a book cover or a poster illustration to allude to the drama and passion that goes on inside. It can be a full-fledged scene painting of a battle with very specific characters in it. And in order to communicate this, they have to be very careful to use the symbols and techniques that the public is familiar with and already understands. That if you're going to communicate, let's go bare bones simple. If you're going to convey that someone is dying, you're going to need to make sure that you are using the symbols of death that everyone recognizes. Red, blood, sunken cheeks, skulls, ravens, an eagle sometimes if it's a war, a sickle, ghosts, white sheets. These are things that your audience will be familiar with and already have some easy way of connecting the dots to understand the story. Fine art is trying to communicate an idea, but it's not limited to just what people already understand. In fact, fine art is best when it's trying to invent new language. The very first time someone painted a skull to represent death, people might have been confused about it. You wonder how could people can be confused. Like, well, there are actually different cultures around the world think of a skull very differently. That modern Western culture often sees a skull as something scary, something to be afraid of, fear, danger. In Mesoamerica, that the skull was less about danger and more a symbol of life in a way that's not easy to describe here on the radio. Skulls in certain parts of the world might have represented death, but they represented something very high and important and spiritual. Ancient Egypt almost couldn't care less. They thought everything related to death had to do with the heart, and so you almost never find skulls depicted anywhere. And the question is, were they afraid of skulls? Was that representative of evil or fear, or did they just not care? I suspect that it wasn't important enough to them, because they definitely have depicted things that they were afraid of. So fine artists try to introduce new symbols and communicate that, and it's successful when people pick up on it, and people reuse it and people talk about it. That's one of the reasons why a lot of fine art exhibits are called controversial. They're trying to be controversial. Controversy means that people are talking about it. They're discussing the symbols, and they're trying to agree or disagree on what they mean. They're also trying to agree or disagree on whether the message is valid, but that's part of the discussion. Illustration is specifically trying to be as literal as possible to communicate the idea. It can have some symbols in it that can be deeper to think about, but those are add-ons. Those accentuate the illustration. It's not so much an illustration if it's vague in any way, or the audience has to interpret what they're looking at. This means that it's just a slight adjustment between the two fields of art. And I'm not going to say every artist, but almost every illustrator I have known can do fine art easy. They just have to change the message from being something that everyone already knows, or sorry, not change the message, change the symbols from something that everybody already knows, but to something that is more personal to them that they want to convey. For instance, maybe that their relationship with death has to do with some particular, like a robin, a strange bird, not strange, but a bird that's strange to the concept of death to the rest of the world, but it's something that means something to them because maybe they went to a grave as a child, and robins were pecking at the grass all the way around it, and they've made that equation the rest of their life. So they're going to paint something related to death and put robins into it. It means something to them, but the audience has not seen that before or not paid attention to before. And if they do it enough times, they can introduce robins as part of the global lexicon, the zeitgeist, as it were, for their audience. Fine artists, I don't know that many fine artists that do illustration as well. I think part of it is that the fine artists that I have met got into fine art because they have something very specific they want to say, and they're passionate about using their own visual language. This isn't to say that they can't, or there aren't those that can't. It's just that the ones that I know prefer so much to make up their own that some of them even deliberately avoid using symbols that other people do. Well, you can't avoid those things when you're doing illustration. Graphic design is all about proportion and about composition, juxtaposition of simpler symbols, not simple ones, just simpler symbols, and how they relate to each other. Colors are symbols. Lines that are curved versus lines that are sharp. The way the lines shape to form positive and negative spaces to give you symbols of, take two very easy to recognize symbols and put them together like a skull and a flower, and various ways you can have the flower inserted into the eye sockets of the skull, or the skull inserted into the heart of the rose, or many variations. Those relationships, those juxtapositions, are all things that any fine artist and illustrator should be able to do. Just, do they prefer to do that? Do they choose to do that? Illustrators usually like to do something much more complex or much more literal, but they certainly can design. I mean, composition is a part of every form of art. Graphic designers find it more difficult to do illustration. Just because of the level of detail is not their passion. Their passion is more in composition and more in the conceptual ideas and less about the rendering. Again, these are generalizations and not criticisms in any way. I'm showing how I'm describing the relationships between the professions to show how artists can go from one to the next as they choose. Techniques are where many artists get very bogged down. There's nothing wrong with developing a technique and throwing your heart into that technique and making your statement as that technique. However, in 2025, that is a very dangerous path to take, because AI generated software steals, not a political statement, this is a legal statement, steals from existing artists. And so there used to be a time in which someone would spend their life developing a style, and the world would recognize that they developed that style and put their name to it. Picasso and Braque with Cubism, for instance. They were not the only ones to do it. They're the famous ones for inventing it. Other people practiced it and worked with it and did variations, and it expanded, but those two names kept going with associated with it. Picasso, Cubist works far outsell and are more celebrated than any other Cubist artist out there. Well, nowadays, you focus yourself on a style or a technique, and before you even have a chance to get a name for it, it can be stolen by AI scrapers, and it can be used by anyone as a style. And this is why I agree with Miyazaki, who said that it is a crime against humanity. They're not just stealing the art, they're stealing the reputation of the genius artist who invented a new style. So it's more than ever, it's important to be flexible with your techniques. Yes, perfect one technique, but also perfect a second one and perfect a third one. You can prefer it, work with one technique over another or two techniques over another. Fantastic, great. Keep doing it, pushing it. But then you have to make sure that you are also branding yourself with it as loudly as possible. Yes, that's going to get more attention to the AI scrapers, but you need to get that out there so that when we are eventually allowed to sue these companies for what they've stolen, that you have records of it, that you were first. and that they didn't get it from somebody else. You need to be vigilant. Copyrights doesn't perfect styles, only executions. Okay. So that means that in order for AI to copy you, they're going to have to cut and paste. They're literally going to have to copy what you've done and paste it into something else and then merge it with something. And it's essentially a collage. Yeah, I know there are people who argue, oh, there's all 3D stuff. No, it's still collage. I've done way too much computer programming and computer graphics in my career. I was in an animation studio when I was a teenager. I've been in the entire industry all the way through. Whatever technology is being used, the end result is still collage. But that means you need to pay attention, you need to watch for it. And when you see it, you need to mark it, you need to circle it. But this isn't about AI, this is about being flexible. Someone will hire you for your technique and for your style. That's fantastic. As soon as they can get that technique and style cheaper, they will try to move somewhere else. So this is where you have to be flexible and be able to do multiple things, because you may not be able to keep control of that one style. Or maybe your preference is already in the style of somebody else. I mean, when I was growing up, everyone wanted to paint like Frazetta and Boris Vallejo, all the fantasy artists. There were some artists who really wanted to paint like the masters of sci-fi, like Bob Eggleton, monsters, but he also does a lot of space stuff. Frank Frazetta did a lot of space and planets and stuff. There are some masters of space scenes in sci-fi that I do not recall the names of, and I'm sorry, but they were, legends. And there are people who follow those and emulate them. Well, nowadays there are so many people emulating them that it's hard to compete. That the primary purchaser of fantasy art today is going to be Wizards of the Coast, especially purchasing art for Dungeons and Dragons and for Magic the Gathering. And while they do have many artists and there are some standouts, a large number of them are artists who are all painting in the same vein. And there are people growing up today who say, I want to paint like that. And they're learning to paint like that. But there's not as much work. That's not inflating right now. There's that the Wizards of the Coast and other publishers get to pick and choose which artists they use. And there are fantasy artists out there who are struggling because they focus their entire life on learning how to do this incredibly technically challenging and creatively challenging style. You're welcome to do that. I highly recommend that you learn to do other things, other styles. Yes, paint glossy, realistic people in amazing settings, but maybe you can figure out how to make the composition your own, how to make the characters your own. Things about Frank Frazetta that stand out today is that, yes, he painted models for practice. He claims he didn't, but you know for a fact he did. But when he would paint a character for one of his pieces, especially women, he would do mostly the anatomy and figures out of his head. And then he would give so many of them a very particular face. He's commented on it. He calls it the Frazetta face. He said that he's tried to draw faces other ways, but they never felt right to him. So you can tell a Frazetta artwork or Frazetta-inspired artwork by their face. Well, there's another artist out there who uses themselves as a model for almost everything, including their female characters. And while if you've never met him, you won't know that all of his characters are based off of himself. When you meet him and look at the art standing right behind him, it's glaringly obvious. Now, that's not a problem, but that is a signature style, a signature technique. And that I led it this way to teach you what signature means. You need to have a signature in your style, in your technique, in your art. Um, Bob Eggleton's signature is not just painting monsters, but he has a particular technique of painting and applying the paint, and that mixes the colors in such a way that they're not smooth blends. It is a slight impasto, but when he applies a scale of like a Godzilla scale and paints it with a single brush stroke, that single brush doesn't have the paints all mixed together. And you can see in that one brush stroke, you can see the greens and the blues and the reds and the yellows and the blacks and even the whites still not completely blended. And it gives every brushstroke he applies a texture that, while not unique in the universe, is signature Bob Eggleton. Sorry. And he's spearheaded that for so long that is who he is. Of course, he definitely applies that into content that makes sense. He applies it to monsters and to creatures and to robots and to landscapes and to spacescapes and to places where that energy that is in there resonates and gives you that that feeling of being in the piece. He doesn't do pinups, because using that technique on bare naked flesh really would not have the same impact. Now, he's had a wonderful career. He's an amazing artist. He's got a great career. He's had his name. 2025, if you're starting out, that type of technique is great to learn, but you have to do more. How are you going to apply it differently than Bob to stand out from Bob? What else are you going to do besides that, so that when someone doesn't need that technique that Bob does, because when Bob is still alive and he's still working, if someone wants something that's done by Bob, they'll just call it Bob. For years, people would want art, they want to paint like Michael Whelan. Well, Michael Whelan was still illustrating. And if publisher wanted to hire somebody that looked like Michael Whelan, well, they would just hire Michael Whelan. But when you have a publisher like Wizard of the Coast that has so much, it's the exact opposite. I'm sorry, not the exact opposite. Sorry, a little bit tired to have not had all of my coffee. It's a different situation, but it's still a challenge. There are still more artists than there is art. And when they're going to pick and choose who to use, they can make their decisions by many, many different criteria than just, is the artist good enough? Giving a signature work of art that they're going to promote, they're not going to give it to someone brand new. They're going to make sure they give it to someone that they trust, that the fans have a relationship with, so that it helps sell the product. If it's something that's not so right, maybe they'll try it with somebody new, especially if somebody who's been doing it for a while, they're is suddenly outpriced or suddenly unavailable. Then you're going to be scrambling for things. So many illustrators come to a point in which that where their art can fit in the marketplace becomes their responsibility. They have to show that what they're doing will sell and resonates with people. And this can happen at any point in their career. It can happen at the beginning of their career when people are unsure of whether it'll work. It can happen in the middle of their career if they focus on a style and suddenly, marketing directors are confused and think that style might be passé. or at the end of their careers, in which, again, it's passe. They might think it's passe, but it worked, and you need to prove that it's retro. Your brand, your signature, comes into your responsibility. And where are you going to apply it? This is something you should always think about. How can your style, plural, how can they be applied? What do you like to do? This is where you'll see a lot of artists. They'll come out with their own game. They think their art fits a game. They love games. They'll create a game. They'll apply their own art to the game. They'll do card decks. They'll do tarot decks. They'll make clothing lines. A lot of graphic designers make clothing lines. They'll make bookmarks. They'll make products to put their art on. And they'll usually start on the low end, the cheaper end products, because, they're expensive to make. Then they'll start moving up through the ranks and start, making some things that are more and more expensive to make. And the idea is to prove it in the marketplace and maybe convince somebody that it's going to be the next big thing. This is fantastic. You do not need to be the next SpongeBob SquarePants to make a decent living selling your art. If you go to any Comic-Con, you're going to see artists who have really forced their style into the public marketplace. And, they've made a name for themselves, are doing quite well as far as how artists are considered. I'm going to get her first name wrong, but Derico, I believe. I want to say Camilla, Derico. Maybe I... yes, Camilla Derico. So she has her own signature style that starts off with a color palette, a level of sensitivity of how she applies her paint, her subject matter, certain symbols that she has made, she has taken ownership of, that anyone else doing them are going to be considered, copying her. And she has an incredible brand. She's spent years developing this. I don't know if she's ever illustrated, but I don't think she has to. But her products have gotten out there to go on things, to appear on products of her own kind. I'm sure by now or soon that you're going to see her products out in stores with licensed. You might even see it already. Just now, I'm thinking about mass market. There's an artist, Rebecca Beckett Griffith, hyphenated last name. I'm probably screwing up her first name. Jennifer Beckett Griffith. Anyway, so she started off as an illustrator. I've talked with her and her husband, and she used to work in Florida for some toy companies, and she did illustrations internally, both concept and finishes. And then she started doing her own work, and her own work were big-eyed, doll-like girls in various settings, including various mythologies, obviously fairies, but not exclusively. And then started doing work upon request, as people were commissioning them, and ended up doing a few things that were licensed characters. Got to the point where she developed a relationship with Disney, and she has a studio and a store in Disney selling her paintings of Disney characters. Started off as an illustrator, found a passion with what she did. She found a market for it, and boom, Now she has her full-on brand with a major company and a relationship. But it started off with, transitioning and being flexible. She didn't say, all I want to do is just draw these little cartoons. And she didn't say, all I want to do is draw just my own characters, my own idea. She did a little bit of everything. And like most artists, you do what sells to pay the bills, and then you do what you want for yourself the rest of the time. There are some artists that can have difficulties with that. They find something that sells, dramatically to a point where their fans don't want them to be flexible. I'm not going to give any examples of that, but I've had conversations, and I've seen some tragic examples of some incredible artists whose fan bases actually, have attacked them for doing different things. I highly suggest you try and find a way around that. I try to find a way of not listening to your fans pigeonhole you, if only because fans are trendy and they can go away. There's a lovely, amazing artist that I'm again not going to name their names, but they became famous for their vision and their style. Over the years, that it has now come down to they are mostly just doing their versions of licensed characters, but they're the ones paying for the licensing because the fans of their original art aren't buying anymore for whatever reason. Have they aged out? Do they not have the money anymore? Do they have what they need and moved on to another artist? Who knows? But they've now had to move their art to only doing licensed characters. And it's now become collectibles that it's not this artist's art. It's now this character that happens to be by this famous artist. And that is a emotional struggle. It's I don't know how financially stable it is at all, but can be an emotional struggle to feel that loss. I'll talk a little bit about Echo right now. Echo has a beautiful stubborn streak in that she wants to do her own creativity. She wants to do her own vision of her own things. She doesn't mind taking ideas that may have been repeated, but she puts her own vision and her own spin on it. If you've ever gone to her website, echochernik.com, or better still, her commercial art, echo-x.com, you'll see she has dozens and dozens of techniques and styles that she applies to so many things. Of course, she's world famous for her Art Nouveau, but she's never done her Art Nouveau the way Alphonse Mucha did. And with one exception, she was specifically hired by the state of Illinois to create a poster that was supposed to be in the style, and their exact request was to make it look as if Alphonse Mucha did it in the 19th century. And she did it. And immediately the legal team freaked out and actually accused her of copying a Mucha piece and demanded that she send them all of her drawings on it and all the proof, including the photo reference for the piece, for them to be able to fight any legal action. Well, one of the photographs happened to be herself in her underwear that I took as a photo reference. So somewhere in Illinois, Springfield, I believe, there's a lawyer's arm who has a picture of Echo in her underwear ready to go to court with. But overall, anyone who knows anything about Art Nouveau, putting her art, Nouveau work right up against Alphonse Mucha's can see the difference. She's using his sensitivity, but not his elements, not his style. She is applying her own modern sensibilities. She's using things a little asymmetrical. She is playing with depth of field. She, of course, renders more deeply than he ever did, or rather, that we think he ever did, because he was working with paper and printmaking techniques and did mostly watercolors in that regard. And the oil paintings he didn't even do what people think of as a signature style. He did a more classical style. She's done work in a cloisonné style, pretending to be a ceramic style in which gold wire was laid in a pattern and then filled with colored enamel. She, of course, has done neoclassic style paintings, extremely rendered portraits, usually of women. She's done graphic, almost comic book like images. She's done images like early 20th century posters. She's done black and whites in various styles, fully shaded, fully rendered, watercolor, pen and ink. She's done zipatone. That's the story for another day. She's done gold leaf. She's done gold leaf on canvas and gold leaf on paper. She's done gouache and watercolor mixes. She does finished graphite pieces. And we put her art on many things as we can. We put it on cards and coasters and ornaments and, of course, book covers. Well, now she's doing it on scarves, silk scarves. She's making her own. And maybe one day she'll get the attention of licensed companies that will want to put her stuff on products you'll see throughout the entire country. But there is a threshold there of how much money you make versus how much work you're putting into it. I'm checking the time. So, and of course, she's also done her fantasy art, fantasy style. She's done stained glass windows style. She hasn't done stained glass windows, but she has done styles that look like stained glass windows. She's done work that looks like 19th century art, some things that look like early 20th century art, things that look futuristic, or what she imagines to be futuristic. She's done wine labels and video games and board games and point of purchase displays at the post office and mailers and cards that have been sent to club members and things like that, and magazine covers and magazine interiors and book interiors. And while she has a few styles that she's known for, primarily Art Nouveau and neoclassic and her black and white pen and inks, none of them have rocketed her to the stratosphere in the way that Picasso or others have. And if you think that that's a problem, let's look at Frank Frazetta. Frank Frazetta started off primarily in comics. He did comic art. He was an illustrator for Little Abner for a long time. He did comics and cartoons for, Playboy magazine, I think Esquire as well. He also did book covers. He also did movie posters. He did, obviously did his own comics, but he also worked with, I think, Don Bluth for an entire film. And he had different styles. Hello, let's look at Alphonse Mucha. Yes, everyone knows his famous Art Nouveau style that he did for posters and packaging. And he became famous for it, but he kept being hired to do those things. Not the only thing he did. His great Slav epic are enormous paintings, like 12 feet tall by 20 feet wide, oil paintings that are housed in Prague in a museum, that are just his passion work to display the mythology and legends and lore of the Bohemian people. But he also did a lovely project called La Paternostra, the Lord's Prayer, the Father's Prayer. And he took the Lord's Prayer and he illustrated each of the stanzas, or each of the important stanzas. And he made etchings of them. And he made it exactly 100 to be collectible. This was a money-making venture. It wasn't a publishing, it was something he did himself. They were 100 folders of these works of art. I don't remember exactly how many there were, but there were at least 10. And then out of those 100, he took 10 and then hand colored them. So he had even more collectible versions of the collectibles, and then he sold them. Over the years, it's been, that many of them have been broken up, and we own a sheet from one of them, and it was the sheet for the stanza, "Thou shalt not lead me into temptation." Now, you look at this, and it looks like a traditional 19th century book illustration. Doesn't look like anything he would do. I mean, it looks exquisite, but not what he would do. But the image is of a woman hovering over a valley in the darkness, surrounded by demons. And these demons are as cartoonish as you have ever seen. They look like a cross between Warner Brothers and Beards, not Beardsley, not Beardsley. Rackham. It looks like a cross between Warner Brothers and Arthur Rackham. They are nothing. I mean, he hasn't done anything like them in any of his most famous pieces. And that's why we love it, because he did something different, but it's appropriate for the piece. They're supposed to be ethereal and monstrous, and some of them are kind of really goofy. But it's, he's really showing his breadth of ability and vision in that piece. So find ways of taking your art and applying it. I think I was going to save this, but I got plenty of time, so I'm going to say this next part. That what's the best way of phrasing it? I didn't actually write this script yet. Know thyself. Self-awareness as an artist is more critical than it is for being a human being. It is, in my mind, self-awareness is the least respected trait in humanity. But it is absolutely required to be an artist, because you need to know what you're doing and why. Now, it's not something that you're going to be born with. It's not something that you're going to be able to see right away. You have to step back and look back at your own work. And better yet, you need to find someone who you respect, who can see it for you and explain it to you. And then you have to internalize it. Obvious things that can be pointed out in your own work is every human being has a preferred color palette. They prefer certain colors and certain color combinations, and they're much more subtle than they like to choose red and green together. It's which red, which green, which gold. Some prefer more jewel tones, some prefer more pastels, some prefer more earth tones, some prefer uh, um, deep earth tones. Some prefer to skew complementary colors in a particular way. And you can tell the difference between two artists attempting the same style by the color palette alone. Brahm, for instance, fantasy artist, did a lot of horror stuff, and he has a very earth tone heavy palette. And it's and there were a lot of people. He got so popular. There was a time in which uh, there are a lot of publishers who wanted to use him, but they couldn't afford him, or they couldn't. He didn't have the time, so they still wanted the project. So they hired other artists to do things in his style. Well, you could tell the difference between, while they might render the same, or they might have a similar composition or something, that the color palette is going to be different. Where is I going with this? Knowing yourself. So learning and understanding your own color palette is probably the easiest thing, because you're just going to say, I just don't like this color combination. If you don't like it, you don't use it. That means that's part of your signature style. But also, why do you paint what you paint and the direction that you paint? Where are you going with it? Obviously, if you're an illustrator, you're going to be illustrating what people give you to illustrate, but you're still going to have a preference and some choices. Someone says they want a character in this particular way with all these details, that's fine, but are you going to paint them facing left, facing right, looking up, looking down? When they say they're supposed to be fierce, are you going to naturally decide that fierce means they look like a jerk? Or does fierce specifically mean that they're going to look sad but determined? These are subtleties that really affect things. There are artists who, when they're asked to paint someone who is attractive, they default to their personal preference, whether it is something that their audience would appreciate or not. Well, that's all well and good for your own art, but for an illustration project, you're going to have discussions. The client is going to want their representation of, perfection represented, not yours. So there's, you need to be flexible, being able to work with that. But if you understand that about yourself, when someone approaches you with a project, you can just say, hi, I'm not comfortable with this. And rather than turning it down, you can say, can I tweak the character like this? And if you can word it in just a way that sounds empowering and improving the project, you can get a resounding yes, and then you've influenced it and you've gotten your vision out to the world. Briefly, one of the reasons why AI has become so popular is that people definitely want to see, what they imagine to be perfection. The problem is that they aren't imagining anything at all, and therefore they're accepting whatever they're given, even no matter how incorrect it is anatomically, or artistically, or execution wise. And but that's going to get them into trouble. In fact, it already has. Knowing yourself. When you know yourself, then you can see yourself in everything that you do. It's really hard. Echo has a hard time seeing it. She does so many different styles, but we have a gallery with her art. And you walk in and I can see it in every single piece. I can see her. I can see her line quality, her particular style of how she draws curves, how she, what her vision of women is, that what her vision of animals are. Every animal has a personality. There are not many people who do that. Every woman has an extremely deep, complex face. Okay, there are a few that don't have as much, but they're complex. They're human. There are people who don't draw human faces at all. They draw dull faces. That's not a problem. That is a style. Commit to it, or be flexible. Find ways of doing both. The idea, if drawing, implacid plastic faces is not part of your style, it's just part of what you've been required to do or been stuck doing, well, improve, get better, keep doing more. Play things up, explore and find out who you are and what you mean as an artist and what your value is out in the world, because you'll find it. Our daughter, Kat Chernik, is 20 years old, and she has, she has about 11 works of art to her name that we're putting to the public. And she sells extremely well. But they're all different. She has 2 pieces that are fan art characters from a video game. She has 2 pictures that are cute, fuzzy creatures that are monstrous. She has a picture of a mouse in a field mouse sitting in a poppy. She has a picture of a rat with mushrooms growing out of it, but it's not painted horrific. You just have to know what a cordyceps are to be afraid of it. She has one work of art of a fossil, just a black and white image of a fossil. She has one sketch image of a 3-headed skeleton topping cupcakes with icing using a piping bag. And she sells incredibly well. What unites all of those things? Well, she has a pulse. She paints what she is passionate about, what she's interested in, and the way she's interested in her execution, it speaks to people. I would never in my life put those things together and say one person not only did all that, but one person would collect all of that. She has collectors of people who will collect everything that she does. And not just because she's Echo's daughter, it's because it speaks to them. They come into the gallery and they'll look at everything, and then they'll find this sketch of a 3-headed skeleton piping, a sketch. I have to make prints of a sketch for people because they fall in love with it and they want to take it home out of everything in the gallery. It has a palette that's obvious, that's appealing to everyone, but there's a thought process behind it. There's an idea, and the idea is just, as I can describe it, a casual blend of horror and cuteness in a way that it's subtle in its effect. It doesn't punch you in the face and say, look how cute and horrific this is. It's not like Stitch, that is a cute thing that says, I am horrible and menacing, but you never actually get the idea that they're horrible and menacing. They're not some of these video games that make monsters out of stuffed animals or creepy dolls. It has her own touch and her own subtle vision to it that people love. So, and yet she can also illustrate and do things for other people, for clients. This is the way. This is how you stay both economically busy to earn money, but also how you stay sane as a creative person. Apply yourself to whatever works for you. When Echo first went out, we tried putting her art on when started going out to the public with her art. We put her art on everything, but we found out that if we put her art on bookmarks, we would spend 20 minutes talking to somebody to sell a bookmark while literally selling her $50 prints hand over fist. We would sell 10 of those to one bookmark. There's no reason for her to carry bookmarks at all. But other artists, their style, their vision works perfectly for bookmarks. It's just what that audience wants out of them. It's can be price point related, it can be economically related, but it's mostly just what appeals to people. There are. I'm gonna again just that's a tangent for another day. Apply yourself, keep trying, put yourself on as many different things as possible, show off as many things as possible. I am not telling you to be flexible and to change yourself. That's not the point. It's exploring yourself and seeing what you can do and what resonates with people, with your audience. Generally speaking, if it's something that you love and that you would have, there's an audience for that. Audience of people like you. Is it an enormous audience? Is it a small audience? I don't know. You won't know until you actually try and put it out there. One interesting thing is Echo has like 400 works of art that we bring out to shows. We never know what's going to sell. We go to one show and, we'll sell out of some things that we haven't sold in several different shows or months. It's people change, regions may have preferences, times have preferences. So you just have to keep on top of it. But ultimately, when all is said and done, as an artist, you're selling your soul, and you got to put it out there, and you got to put it on the page. Thank you very much. I'm looking to see if there's any comments or questions. I don't happen to see any right now. I'm going to do a quick double check on YouTube to see if. No, I don't see anything on YouTube right now. So thank you very much for listening. We will be back. Echo will be back next week. Please watch Illustrators of the Future with an open mind. These people poured their souls into their work, into their writing, and into their art from all over the world, all walks of life. Every single type of human being, every single background you can imagine is going to be there. The political climate has put some crimp in international travel for people, so there might be some more videos than normal. But we need to collectively support each other in the creative community. Thank you very much. You have a great day.